to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. It's right up there.
Oh, right up there. Well, it's indeed a great pleasure to follow such esteemed opening that Ken has given. So, at any rate, we are very, very fortunate to have Colonel, what shall we call him? But Tom Vaughn. And Tom goes back quite a distance in time with the Overmountain Victory Trail Association. He's very passionate about the Overmountain Men. They served as the OVTA, Overmountain Victory Trail Association president, and is now serving as treasurer. His program is called, y'all ready for this? Letter, Letter. In a normal year, Overmountain Victory Trail Association presents the Overmountain Men in the Battle of Kings Mountain, which, of course, was October 1780. Okay, the battle was referred to by Thomas Jefferson as the battle that turned the tide of success during the Revolution. A force of 880 men assembled at Sycamore Shoals in now what is Elizabethton. 240 men led the Sevier from Washington County and other counties in the Washington District. 240 from Sullivan County, led by Isaac Shelby, and 400 southwestern Virginia, led by Colonel William Campbell. General.
If you don't mind, I'm going to put my cheat notes down here where I can look at them every once in a while just to keep me straight. Except, I have not done a good job yet of educating Mr. Oakes.
He's from Georgia.
There are 1,000 men. Mr. McDowell, wave your hand. He brought an additional 160, so there were 1,000 men. And as David said, put on your hats, your 18th century hats, and join me. The arrogance of that man. What in the world was Mr. Ferguson thinking when he sent that threat across the mountain? That he was going to burn out our lands, lay waste with fire and sword. Now, as a Scot, what did he think was going to be happening? He knew what we would think. I think Mr. Ferguson may get more of a comeuppance than he wishes. Now, I had the honor of joining the Grand Muster at Sycamore Shoals. Our colonels took deep offense, as our men did, at that threat Ferguson sent across the mountain. 240 men from here in Sullivan County 240 more from Washington County, 160 under McDowell from across the mountains had retreated to this area to recuperate after a hit-and-run battle. 400 from Washington County, Fincastle County, Virginia, under Colonel William Campbell. Now, I have seen Colonel William wielding that mighty broadsword of his. And I suspect that Ferguson may get a taste of that broadsword. More sword than he threatened us with. Colonel William is a strong commander, strong leader. He knows how to fight. But he disobeyed the orders of the Virginia Congress because his orders were to protect the lead mines in Southwest Virginia that were supplying General Washington with lead to fight the British. But I convinced him that he alone could not withstand Cornwallis's army if we lost. So he brought 200 of his men, and Arthur Campbell sent another 200 of his. Now, Mr. Carter has given his full blessings to this mission. Without his blessings, we probably would not have been able to go. Mr. Adair, the entry taker, why, do you know what he did? He turned over his entire treasury for this mission because he decided that if he didn't turn it over and the British came in, it was gone anyway. Mr. Adair will probably feel the bite of the rope unless we win this battle. Now, Miss Mary Patton, bless her. She provided us with 500 pounds of the finest black powder that could be made. She learned from her father. She too, if we lose this battle, may well feel the bite of the rope around her neck, as we all may. Now, Colonel Sevier, from down on the Nolichucky, recently read an article in the London paper. Took a few months to get here, but they must have been talking about his riflemen in that paper, because they were talking about those shirt-tail men with their cursed, twisted rifles, the most feared widow and orphan makers on the planet. Pretty much describes a lot of our riflemen. Now, my son Isaac, well, he's the youngest colonel of the bunch, so he can't command. None of the rest of the colonels will serve under him as the youngest. But he is a fearsome fighter. Sometimes I think he has a personal grudge against Ferguson. And I fear that grudge may lead him into doing something that is rash in battle. My son, take care. and be a good leader. Now, the 1,000 men that were gathered at Sycamore Shoals, there was the good Reverend Doak there that sent those 1,000 men off with the sermon. And such a sermon as it was, all 1,000 men, you could look. There was no sign of fear amongst any of them. There was nothing but determination. As Doak sent them on their way with the cry of the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And our men left. I, General Evan Shelby, I should be at their command. I know how to battle. I know how to fight. But after these more than 40 years of fighting, my body is worn, and I would do not but slow them. All I can depend on is the sword of the Lord and of Gideon and divine providence. It has been late. A messenger has arrived and brought me a letter. And if I may share a bit of this with you. 27 September instant. It was written 3 days ago. Dear Father, we sent the cattle back after 1 day. We traveled too slowly with them to ever catch Ferguson. We butchered a few for several days' ration and trust we can find friends at McDowell's in a few days. We took care to shelter Mary's powder under a large overhanging rock. We continued as we discussed along Bryce's trace up across the gap on Yellow Mountain. Several events of note. The snow at the gap was shoe-mouth deep. And as we took a rest, we took a roll and discovered 2 men missing, Chambers and Crawford. We fear that they have advanced to warn Ferguson of our coming, your obedient son. I know that route. It's a 3,000-foot hard climb up that mountain. The men and the horses were well rested, so that should not have provided any significant obstacle to them. I will await further word. Another message, another letter, dated 30th of September. I received this. It was written 5 days ago. From Quaker Meadows and McDowell Plantation. I put pen to paper to give you the latest news. Ferguson has abandoned the region. He has heard we are coming. Reports tell us he may now be at a place called Gilberttown, but moves frequently to find supplies. This place is a 2-day hard ride south of here. We leave at dawn. A bit of excellent news, though. Colonel Cleveland of Surrey County received our messages and has joined us with 400 of his militia. They are well experienced in fighting the British and know the habits of Mr. Ferguson. Colonel Cleveland has quite a reputation. If he catches one of those loyalists, they may find themselves at the end of a rope thrown over a tree limb. Forage is in short supply in this country, as it has been taking the British wherever they can find it, from people loyal to our cause. Ms. McDowell is a most gracious host, and she sent her people out to the mountains to bring in cattle to feed us, for we had no supplies left. The rain has been constant, and the rivers are fresh. 5 days since this message. Has the battle taken place? He was only 2 days away from where Ferguson might be. Worry. I should have been there. I know how to fight. I could have made my body do it. Wait, another message. Written October the 5th. That was 7 days ago, a week. Alexander's Ford on the Green River. Dear Father, I put pen to paper to give you the latest news. We missed Ferguson at Gilberttown. Heavy rain delayed us for 3 days and washed out all tracks of his departure. Rain continued everywhere, and mud. Intelligence has it that Ferguson is moving toward that British stronghold in South Carolina, Fort 96. We leave in the morning. I have enclosed a broadside Mr. Ferguson issued while he was at Broad River on the 1st of October. Read it and you will see his opinion of us. Backwater men, indeed. Gentlemen, unless you wish to be eat up by an inundation of barbarians who have begun by murdering an unarmed son before the aged father and lopped off his arms, and who, by their cruelty and irregularities, give proof to their cowardice and want of discipline. Well, that's us that Ferguson is talking about. I think he has a rather low opinion of us. Backwater men have crossed the mountain. McDowell, Hampton, Shelby, and Cleveland at their head, so you know what you have to depend upon. If you choose to be pissed upon by ever and ever by a set of mongrels, say so at once and let your women turn your backs upon you. Signed, Colonel Ferguson, 71st Regiment, King Service. Good news. Colonel Lacey of South Carolina just rode into our camp. He captured one of Ferguson's messengers. Ferguson is on the Charlottetown Pike, headed slowly toward Cornwallis's lines. We shall take the most fit men and most fit horses and leave in the morn. The rest of the men will travel as they can. Colonel Lacey will gather his militia and join us at a place called the Cow Pens. Pray we find supplies there. Most have had nothing or little to eat in several days. Pray too that Ferguson has not gotten the reinforcements that he has requested from that bloody Bannister of Tarleton, your obedient son. 5 days, 7 days since he wrote that letter. Surely the battle has happened by now. Is my son, Isaac, dead or alive? I know not. It is in the hands of Providence. If we lost, the first sight we may have is of our rangers that are out patrolling of Ferguson's army coming across that mountain. And we have not enough men and ammunition to resist them strongly. Trust in the divine providence. Wait, my son Isaac is home, and he has brought me something. A bag. And he said that feller Ferguson He said that fellow Ferguson would have no more need of this fine wool coat, that it would keep my rheumatic bones warm in the winter. He said that Colonel Ferguson is now wearing a fine cowhide under a pile of rocks on Little King's Mountain. The threat is done. We took care of that threat. But we are now fully engaged in that war of rebellion that had been taking place far away from us. May the Lord have mercy on our souls. Any questions?
That's good.
Do you know where 96 is?
Fort 96 is south, or it's northeast of Columbia, South Carolina, about 3.5 hours south of the North Carolina, South Carolina border.
Right. It's now that fort is now called the Star Fort.
It is the Star Fort.
And they have a person there that shows you around that fort area. And they show and the reason it's named 96 is because it was 96 miles from that point to Charleston. As I was telling him, 96 is actually it's below Greenwood, South Carolina now. It's called the Star Fort. They have a man there that will give you a tour of the whole area. And there's a road that you can see still in sort of a ditch really that you can see that leads from 96 to Charleston, which is the reason 96 is called a 96.
And the 96th district was a very strong supporter of the king. The fort, the Star Fort, as far as I know, never fell during battle. The American Army tried several times to take it, including having built a tower tall enough for the riflemen to shoot down into the fort The fort's answer was to build the walls higher and put up some internal walls they could hide behind. The next answer was to try to tunnel under the fort to lay explosives to blow up the wall. The tunnel is still partially there. You can't go into it today. The British finally abandoned Fort 96 and pulled back to Charleston when they could no longer supply the fort, but it did not fall in battle.
How many casualties?
Casualties. There were 28 American patriots who were killed on the mountain. There were additional, such as Robert Sevier, that died on the way back. Robert Sevier is a very interesting story. He was, have you ever heard the term buck and ball? The Brown Besses shot a 3/4 inch diameter lead ball. In front of that, they would load 3 or 4 .32 caliber 1/4 inch size shot. So you've got that one big ball that comes out and the smaller balls spread out like buckshot. Robert Sevier had dropped his ramrod, bent over to pick it up, and one of the buckshot hit him in the back, lodged in his kidney. The surgeons could not take that ball out. They told him that if he would take refuge with one of the families around Kings Mountain, that he would probably survive. Robert Sevier's answer was, I am a Sevier. If they catch me, they will hang me and kill the family that is sheltering me. So he got on his horse, escorted by his son James. He said, I want to die on my side of the mountain. Every year we visit his grave in Spruce Pine and pay honors to him. His son James was 15 years old and fought in the Battle of Kings Mountain. And that's not the youngest. The youngest that we know of at Kings Mountain was about 12 years old. Did that answer that question?
I'm kind of new to this area. Where's Kings Mountain?
Kings Mountain is about 7 miles south of Interstate 85, where it enters North Carolina. Interstate 85 runs from South Carolina diagonal towards Charlotte. Kings Mountain is about 40 miles west of Charlotte, North Carolina.
What's the recorded miles from Sycamore Shoals to Kings Mountain? How far did they walk?
They didn't walk, they rode horses. So if you can imagine a trail, and this is a discussion that we have with the National Park Service all the time. Congress, in their infinite wisdom, drew a line on a map and said, this is the route the Overmountain Men took. And to put a trail on the ground, they gave us a half mile on either side of that line. Now, some of those go under lakes and through subdivisions, and the trail actually runs through the old Bluff City Middle School, through the school, and the feet marks are on the hall through the school. It is about 240 miles from Sycamore Shoals to Kings Mountain. The walkers, there were some walkers that were left behind at places like Alexander's Ford And to give you an idea how tough these people were, they'd been on the trail for 2 weeks already. They hadn't eaten in several days. The riders got on their horses at dark 30 on October the 6th, rode 30 miles to cow pens. They found some cattle there that belonged to the loyalists who gathered cattle up to drive them to market in Philadelphia. Some had food. They climbed back on their horses at 9:30 that night in the driving rainstorm and started riding the additional 28 miles to Kings Mountain. Now, you're talking about walking? The people that came from Alexander's Ford, 28 miles on foot, got to Cowpens about the same time the 900 mounted militia were headed toward Kings Mountain. They kept the campfires burning. Our belief is that Ferguson had his spies out. He saw the campfires burning at Cowpens. He did not expect the militia to ride through the night because just a couple of days before they had hunkered down for 2 days around Gilberttown, where we believe a Category 5 hurricane landed and drenched the Carolinas for days in rain. So they walked, and from Cowpens, right at the end of the battle that lasted 1 hour and 5 minutes, there were 28 people that completed that 58-mile walk after having been on the trail for 2 days. But the main forces that to move fast were all mounted on horses. And the guy that was charged to notify Continental Congress killed 3 horses getting to Congress. He was a big guy. Mr. President, stand up, if you would, please. He was bigger than you are. He was about 6'7" or 6'8". He got to Continental Congress, and the guard told him he could not come in. He picked the guard up out of the way and went in and told Continental Congress about the Battle of Kings Mountain. What impact did Kings Mountain have? That was the first significant American victory in 2 years. Cornwallis and Washington, or the British and Washington, Clinton, had fought to a standstill. England was in a world war, had no more men or material. Continental Congress was completely broke, had no men and material to supply Washington. So they danced back and forth for 2 years in the North. One of our guys went to, we went to the grand opening of 2 museums, American Museum of Revolution in Philadelphia and Museum of American Revolution in Yorktown. Was talking to one of the main presenters and a guy that lives right down the road here. Was talking to him, and the presenter said, "Now, don't you agree Saratoga was the turning point of the American Revolution?" And Steve looked at him and said, "Why, no." Presenter said, "Well, why not?" "Well, you guys up north played with him for 5 years. You sent them south. We whooped them in 1 year and 12 days, and Cornwallis surrendered 1 year and 12 days after Kings Mountain." Kings Mountain actually changed the entire course of the American Revolution. And what I like to tell people is that the beginning of the end of the American Revolution started right here. Because without it, Washington would not have had an opportunity to appoint General Greene as the commander of the Southern Army. The Battle of Cowpens would not have happened. Cornwallis lost 25% of his army at Kings Mountain. He lost another 25% at Guilford Court. Tarleton lost his 25% at Cowpens in January 1781. Kings Mountain was October 7th, 1780. Guilford Courthouse a couple of months later. Cornwallis officially won that battle. I have a London paper at home that one of the Parliament people was quoted in saying, "Any such more victories and our army is lost." Because at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, even though Cornwallis officially won by holding the field at the end of the battle, he lost 60% effectiveness of his army, gave up the Southern campaign, moved into Virginia, could not recruit anybody else, because at Guilford Courthouse, to win that battle, Cornwallis ordered his cannon turned on a melee battle fight in the middle where the Greene's army was starting to break through. The British and the Americans were fighting. He turned his cannon on his own men to break up that charge. It was hand-to-hand fighting. He lost complete respect of his army. He lost all ability to recruit anybody else in the colonies. By the way, do you know how many British were at Kings Mountain? Say it loud. One. Patrick Ferguson. Everybody else was an American colonist. You might have one son fighting for the Redcoats. You might have one son fighting for the Patriot Army. A story, one of our members, and these are his ancestors. A wounded British laying on the ground after the battle, calling for help, water. One of the militia walked by, looked down at him, and said, "Look to your own for help." Walked off and left him. You know who he left laying on the ground? His brother-in-law. That's how brutal the battle was in the South. It was our first true Civil War. And we can't tell that to students because we teach a lot of 4th, 5th graders, and they have not learned to distinguish yet between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, the War of Northern Aggression, depending on where you're from. So we are careful about how we do that. David said we teach kids. We also coordinate our programs with teachers and with the standards of learning for the students. so that we have a battery of different programs that we can use depending on the grades. And we'll do kindergartners all the way through college ROTC students and anything in between, and then young audiences like this. Anybody else? If I don't know, I'll make it up. And by the way, I am not a historian by trade. I am an engineer with an MBA behind that, and became fascinated with this story after I retired, so that I had time to come out and do stuff like this year round.
Was Ferguson's girlfriend killed at Kings Mountain?
A lot of debate. There were two, Virginia Paul and a Virginia Sal. It was per British regulations that each officer was allocated call it a camp follower, to do the cooking, the cleaning, and everything else. The militia would not intentionally kill a woman. To give you an idea of how good a shot they were, Ferguson was shot on his horse, very possibly. Anyhow, there are many people that claim that they shot him. He came off his horse. When the horse was stopped, Ferguson had 9 bullet holes in him. The horse was not touched. That's how good of a shot they were. There's a debate about whether it was his girlfriend. It's something, we know the names of 2. It's something that I have had discussions with the National Park Service about how many other camp followers there would have been, because Ferguson had something like 15 wagons full of baggage for the officers, for the men, the supplies, and they would have typically been authorized a camp follower or 2 per company to take care of the cooking and the cleaning and the sewing and everything else that had to be done. We do not know who any of the others are. Kings Mountain was shall I say, not a highly populated area during that time. We do know that within hours after the battle, family members were searching the mountain, looking for any of their dead relatives. So that meant that there had to be people at very close proximity, family members that were coming in to see what they looked, to see if they were dead or alive. 28 Patriots killed, about 68 wounded. Ferguson lost 100 and roughly 70 killed, about that many wounded, and his entire 1,100-man army captured. There wasn't killed and wounded. Left the ones that were too wounded on the mountain that couldn't travel with them, and started taking the prisoners toward Hillsborough to exchange for American prisoners. Whole other story behind that. See, no telling the answer you'll get when you ask a question. I run off in lots of different rabbit holes.
Well, Well, Colonel or General Vaughn, as the case may be, you are a great example of a man who can bring history alive. I mean, that is very credible, very touching, and a great picture of what went on starting here.
If you don't mind, I'm getting out of this wool.
Well, you know, I think it was Warren Buffett said you didn't know who was swimming naked until the tide went out. Remember that?
That was a complaint that some of the fair folk in the Northeast had about the soldiers coming into town, and they would be naked in the rivers taking a bath. Now, naked in that time may have simply meant that they didn't have on their waistcoat, because any gentleman would have never been caught without all of this plus the coat.
So you have explained the difference in naked and naked. You know, those are two completely different things. Anyway, this is a great history lesson for all of us, and a situation that I never realized was so founded right here in East Tennessee. I knew that the people went to Kings Mountain from here, but I never realized it was that many and so significant, as you pointed out so well.
Depending on the historians you're looking at, one of the things we talk about, if I may, where are your textbooks written? What schools? Generally Ivy League. I was looking to see if there were any Harvard or Yale t-shirts, sweatshirts. I see several Dobbins-Bennett sweatshirts. I will guarantee the history books were not written at Dobbins-Bennett. They would be written entirely differently if they had been. So we take that, and I actually have a timeline ladder saved. I'm going to get it made into a poster, because in the history textbooks today, you will see Concord and Lexington, Bunker Hill, Saratoga, Washington crossed the Delaware, and something happened, and Cornwallis surrendered to Washington at Yorktown. Now that something that happened spanned 3.5 years in the timeline. They skipped that entirely. Do you know what state the most Revolutionary War battles took place in?
South Carolina.
South Carolina. Depending on what statistics you read, I have seen as many as 600 skirmishes and battles in South Carolina, more than the entire Northeast. So who won the Revolutionary War?
The South.
The South did, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This
He
is a
said he's
great
not going to
program.
give it back to me.
History is indeed alive. Good to see everybody here today. See, the faces are still smiling. Remember, next month, the archives will be having a program centered on Kingsport with Robert Geip. In May, we'll be dealing with the bridges of Sullivan County, and the Melungeons come later in the season. So I hope to see everybody back. Have a good day and decide whether it's summer or winter when you go out the door.
Great to see you all. Turn in your name tags, okay?
If you haven't signed in, when you came in, please come by Alicia and sign in.